Hey friends, it's Jeremy here again with another chat about John's book of Revelation. And today I want to talk about a kind of really evocative phrase that shows up twice in the letters. Chapter 2, verse 9 and 3, verse 9. It's this phrase, the synagogue of Satan. And I want to talk about kind of what I think this might mean for us. So 2:9, the message to Smyrna, Jesus says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And then chapter 3, verse 9, quite similarly says, Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie, and will make them come and bow down at your feet, and make them know that I have loved you. These are kind of curious phrases, really evocative, right? To have this idea of a synagogue of Satan, a gathering people who serve Satan. And really, in some circles, certainly that I've been exposed to, this gets tied to things like anti-Semitism, the ideas of anti-Jewish sentiment in the early church. And I think some of the fathers may deal with this in some awkward ways as well. There's a ton to say about anti-Semitism that I'm not going to be able to say here today. I will mention this. When I wrote my PhD, I drew from the writings of three figures. I wrote with Charles Williams, who's one of the Inklings, friends of Lewis and Tolkien, and I wrote on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was the German pastor who opposed the Nazis and was killed for it. And then the third figure was a guy named Simon Wiesenthal, who was a Jewish Holocaust survivor and wrote a famous book called The Sunflower. And I brought them together in this discussion of what forgiveness looked like. That was a big part of the PhD that I wrote. But when you're dealing with literature of the Second World War, anti-Semitism's in the background. It's right there. And so I had to do a pretty decent dive into the motives and the thoughts behind and the understanding of what was driving anti-Semitism in Europe leading up to the Second World War. And I'm not going to download all of that information to you right now, but I'm going to say it's a complex phenomenon, and it's a kind of, in some ways, it's a modern phenomenon. Modern anti-Semitism is its own thing, and it's not something I think that the Bible's talking about when they talk about the synagogue of Satan. So maybe another video I'll tell you what I think about anti-Semitism and why I think it's different. But for now, to take my word that they're different phenomena, and there's other reasons to say that, other reasons within the text. So. For John, the author of this revelation, is Jewish. And for him to talk about a synagogue of Satan as a kind of anti-Semitic remark seems kind of self-hating. It's really weird to be Jewish himself and anti-Jewish at the same time. We got to remember that most of the early church, all of the disciples and most of the early church figures were themselves Jewish. So they wouldn't be anti-Semitic. And of course, on top of all that, Jesus himself, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, is the Jewish Messiah. So to be anti-Semitic and Christian in the ancient world and today is bizarre. It's really bizarre. That's like saying you love and hate Jesus at the same time. It's very, very strange. But what's going on in the letters and in these criticisms is that there are real problems happening in the early church, real issues cropping up. And when you read about these things, like the synagogue of Satan and the Nicolaitans and the Jezebel and Balaam and the false apostles, I think what you find is you can find evidence of these things running throughout the New Testament. And with the synagogue of Satan business, I think it has to do with the question of how much law do these new Christians have to follow to be Christian? And that's precipitant by, remember, Peter goes to Cornelius' house in Acts 14, and he eats with him, and then he goes to Jerusalem, and there are Jews there who are mad at Peter for going into Cornelius' house and eating with a Gentile. And then he explains all that happened and how the Holy Spirit came upon them, and they believed and were baptized. And the Jews in Jerusalem admit, they're like, wow, if God's Spirit has fallen on them, what can we do? And so they gather this council and send a letter. This is Acts 15. And they said they send Paul, Barnabas, and Silas and Barsabbas, Judas called Barsabbas. And this is what they write. The apostles and the brethren who are elders to the brethren in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia who are from the Gentiles. So it's a letter to these Gentile Christians. Since we have heard that some of our number to whom we gave no instruction have disturbed you with their words. In other words, they're telling you to be really Christian, you have to follow the law. You have to be circumcised. You have to obey the Sabbath. You have to do the food laws. You have to be faithfully Christian. You also have to be fully Jewish. And the early church determined that, no, that's not the case. And they gave some basic rules, like, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these essentials. Abstain from things sacrificed to idols, blood, things strangled, and from fornication. If you keep yourselves free from such things, you will do well. And that was the minimum instruction. All 600 plus commandments of the law boiled down to this so that we can live together in some comfort. Anyway, when you read through Acts, what you'll find is that Paul is going around preaching the gospel. He's preaching it to Gentiles, and then this group of Jews is following behind and making a mess of things by telling them that actually, to really follow Jesus, you have to follow the law. And if you go back and read the book of Galatians, you'll see that Paul is substantially addressing this subset of Jewish Christians. So, when, in John's Revelation, it talks about a synagogue of Satan, it's not saying that all Jews are Satan worshipers. It's far from what he means. It's not saying that Jews are evil. It's saying that there's a group of Christians who claim to be followers of Christ, who say that following Christ means you have to follow the law. And that, for John, is the synagogue of Satan, because you are adding to the work of Christ in order to be saved. Hey, this is complex stuff, but it's exciting stuff. I could do the same thing for the Nicolaitans and for the false apostles and the Jezebelites, but it's worth taking a moment to pause and say that John, not anti-Semitic, but he is critical of those Christians in the church who think that you have to follow the law to be a follower of Jesus. So, I hope this is helpful, and I hope you're blessed today. Thanks.